The courtroom was packed, whispers, camera flashes, and murmurs filled the air like static before a storm. In the front row sat Eric Miles, a 32-year-old black man in a plain gray suit, his wrists still red from the cuffs they'd just taken off. His eyes were calm, but inside, a fire burned. Before we start, hit that like and subscribe button, then comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps these powerful stories coming. Across the aisle stood Officer Dan Keller, a white cop with a smug grin plastered across his face, the kind that comes from years of getting away with too much. Keller leaned toward his partner and muttered loud enough for half the courtroom to hear, another one who thought he could outrun the law. Eric looked up slowly, meeting Keller's gaze. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Moments later, the bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Williams." Everyone stood. The judge entered, an older white man who barely glanced at Eric before sitting. The case was supposed to be simple, resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. But beneath the paperwork, everyone knew the truth. Eric had been beaten and humiliated for asking why he was pulled over. Keller's smirk widened. To him, this was routine, another day, another lesson to teach. When the judge motioned for quiet, Keller took the stand first. "Your Honor," the suspect became aggressive when asked for identification. "I had no choice but to use restraint." Eric clenched his jaw. His attorney, a public defender, barely looked up. It was clear she was outmatched and outnumbered. Then the judge looked at Eric. "Mr. Miles, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Eric stood, calm and composed. "Yes, Your Honor. I wasn't resisting. I was recording." That's when Officer Keller grabbed my phone and... Before he could finish, Keller interrupted, stepping forward. "He's lying. He tried to hit me." Eric turned, his tone still level. "I never touched you." The tension snapped. Keller, unable to contain his temper, lunged forward. Smack. The sound echoed through the courtroom. The entire room went silent. The officer had just slapped Eric across the face, in front of the judge, the jury, and the cameras. Gasps erupted. The judge pounded his gavel, shouting, "Order. Officer Keller, stand down." But the damage was done. The air felt electric, heavy with disbelief. Eric didn't react. He just looked at Keller, eyes steady, a faint smirk at the corner of his lips, not out of arrogance, but understanding. He whispered just loud enough for Keller to hear, "You just ended your own career." The officer froze, confused. The judge, embarrassed and fuming, called for a recess. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse within minutes. "Cop assaults defendant during hearing." The headline wrote itself. But what no one knew, not yet, was that this was only the beginning. Later that afternoon, as the courthouse emptied, Keller and his partner were called into a closed-door meeting. The chief prosecutor was there, looking pale. "You made national news," he snapped. "Do you realize how bad this looks?" Keller scoffed. "Please. That guy's a criminal. He'll fade out like the rest of them." The prosecutor rubbed his temples. "You really don't get it, do you? The hearing was being broadcast. The state's review board is already involved." Keller shrugged. "So? I've been through reviews before." The prosecutor leaned in. "Not like this one. They're sending someone from the federal judiciary to oversee all misconduct cases starting tomorrow." Keller laughed. "Good. Let him come. Maybe he'll finally see what we deal with every day." But the prosecutor didn't laugh. He just said quietly, "You should pray he's not who I think it is." The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with tension. Reporters lined the steps. Every officer in the building straightened their tie, trying to look professional. A black SUV pulled up outside, tinted windows gleaming. Out stepped a man in a dark tailored suit, calm, confident, unreadable. Keller leaned on the railing and muttered, "Another suit trying to tell me how to do my job." But as the man entered the courthouse, whispers began to ripple through the hall. "That's him," someone said. "That's the new chief judge." Keller blinked. "Chief judge? I thought..." Then the man turned the corner. It was Eric Miles. The same man Keller had slapped the day before now walked into the building surrounded by federal marshals. His demeanor was cold, professional, every movement measured. Keller's smirk vanished. "That's impossible," he muttered. He was just. The courthouse doors closed behind Eric as the staff rose to their feet. The presiding judge approached, stammering. "Chief Judge Miles, we weren't expecting." Eric raised a hand. "No need for formalities. I like to see things for myself." He glanced briefly toward Keller, who stood frozen near the wall, color draining from his face. Eric stepped closer, his voice low and deliberate. "Officer Keller, correct?" Keller swallowed hard. "Why, yes, sir." "Good," Eric said. "Then I'm sure you'll appreciate accountability. I'll be reviewing all officer conduct cases, starting with yours." The words hung heavy in the air. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in from every angle. Keller tried to stammer a response, but nothing came out. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the cold realization that the man he had humiliated yesterday now held the power to end his career, legally, publicly, and permanently. Eric turned to the assembled court. "Justice," he said, "isn't about revenge. It's about remembering that power doesn't excuse cruelty." He looked directly at Keller. "And some lessons must be learned the hard way." The crowd erupted in whispers as Eric walked to the bench, his robe draped over his arm. Keller stood motionless, unable to speak. The irony was almost poetic, the oppressor now standing before the man he had oppressed, not as a defendant, but as a man awaiting judgment. As Eric took his seat at the bench, his calm gaze met Keller's one last time. "Let's proceed," he said quietly. The courtroom fell silent. Keller shifted uneasily, his voice trembling for the first time. "Sir, you wouldn't." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Wouldn't what?" "Enforce the law." The flash of cameras, the hushed murmurs, the pounding of hearts, all blurred into a moment that felt bigger than justice. It felt like history correcting itself. Keller's hand twitched nervously. His badge suddenly felt heavier than ever. Eric leaned forward, eyes sharp, and said the words that froze everyone in the room. "Bailiff, bring in the footage from yesterday's incident. We'll start by reviewing Officer Keller's actions in full." Keller's knees nearly buckled. He knew what was on that footage, the slap, the sneer, the arrogance. And now, it would play before the entire courtroom. Eric's voice dropped to a calm whisper as the lights dimmed and the footage began to roll. "You wanted to teach me a lesson," he said softly. "Now it's your turn to learn one." The screen flickered to life, and the last thing Keller saw before the world went black was his own hand striking the man now sitting in judgment over him. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that vibrates in the air, heavy, sharp, alive. Officer Keller sat stiffly in his chair, sweat glistening at his temples as the screen began to play the footage from the day before. The sound of his own voice filled the room. Another one who thought he could outrun the law, Keller's recorded voice sneered. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Murmurs rose as the next moment played, the slap. The sound echoed again, sharp and shameful. The same sound that had humiliated Eric Miles now humiliated Keller tenfold. The judge's gavel struck once. "Order." Eric Miles, no longer the quiet defendant but the new Chief Judge Miles, sat at the bench, face calm, unreadable. The glow from the screen painted his features in cold light as he watched the replay of his own humiliation. But his eyes didn't show pain this time, they showed purpose. When the video ended, Keller opened his mouth to speak, but Eric lifted his hand slightly. "No, Officer Keller. You've spoken enough." The officer swallowed hard. "Sir, Eric's voice cut clean through the air. "When you stood in this courtroom, you thought power made you untouchable. You thought the uniform on your back excused what you did to me. To so many others." He leaned forward, his words deliberate, resonating through every corner of the chamber. "But true power doesn't come from the badge you wear, it comes from the integrity behind it." Reporters scribbled furiously. Keller shifted, his once proud posture collapsing under the weight of his own actions. Eric turned toward the bench. "Clerk, please read the findings." The clerk stood. "After review of the footage and witness statements, this court finds Officer Daniel Keller guilty of assault, abuse of authority, and perjury under oath." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Keller's face drained of color. Eric nodded slowly. "Officer Keller, you are hereby stripped of your badge and rank, effective immediately. You will be remanded to custody pending sentencing." The bailiff approached, but Keller suddenly stood, voice trembling. "You think you're better than me? You don't belong in that chair." Eric's gaze remained steady. "No. I earned this chair, the same way you earned your downfall." Keller lunged forward, but two marshals restrained him instantly. The cameras flashed as the image burned into the public eye, the officer who once stood above others now dragged out in disgrace before the man he'd wronged. Eric watched him go, not with anger, but with quiet finality. "Justice," he said softly, "isn't revenge. It's redemption, for the system and for the people it failed." The courtroom erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions. People stood on benches to cheer. For once, the word justice meant something again. Hours later, after the courtroom emptied, Eric sat alone at the bench. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Rivera, his assistant clerk, stepped inside. "You did it," she said. "He's done. The whole department's under review." Eric sighed, leaning back. "I didn't do it for revenge," he said quietly. "I did it because I know what it's like to be seen as less, to have your truth buried under someone else's power." Rivera smiled faintly. "Then what now?" Eric looked at the empty courtroom, the echoes of justice still humming in the air. Now we rebuild. He stood, removing his robe, folding it neatly on the bench. Every courtroom in this country should remember today, that respect isn't granted by rank, it's earned by humanity. Rivera nodded. You think they'll ever learn? He smiled faintly. If they don't, I'll be right here to remind them. The lights dimmed as he walked out into the rain, his reflection merging with the storm outside, a symbol of justice reborn from humiliation. But as he stepped into his car, a sleek black sedan parked at the curb, a figure emerged from the shadows across the street, an older man in a gray overcoat, watching silently. Eric paused, sensing the stare. The man raised his phone, pressing a button. A distorted voice spoke through Eric's earpiece. Congratulations, Chief Judge Miles. You cleaned one mess, but you just opened another. Eric's expression hardened. Who is this? The voice chuckled. Someone who knows Keller wasn't working alone. Let's just say the system you're trying to fix doesn't want to be fixed. The call cut off. Eric looked up, but the man was gone, swallowed by the rain. He stood there for a long moment, staring into the storm, his reflection flickering in the wet pavement. Justice had been served, but something darker was waiting beneath the surface. He whispered to himself, then I'll serve it again. The end, or maybe just the beginning. Comment below if you know you enjoyed the story. Also don't forget to follow, subscribe and turn on the notification button for more stories coming up.